January 26, 1972, 33,000 feet above Czechoslovakia, a young woman named Vesna Vulović is serving drinks to passengers on JAT Flight 376 when suddenly, the entire aircraft explodes. She's thrown from the wreckage, no parachute, no safety equipment, just her body hurtling towards the earth at terminal velocity, 10 kilometers of freefall. What happens next defies every law of physics, probability, and human survival. And the truly bizarre part? The explosion that started it all might not have been an accident. This is the story of the highest fall ever survived by a human being, and trust me, it only gets stranger from here. Before we get to that fateful day, you need to understand who Vesna Vulović was, because the circumstances that put her on that flight, pure chance. Born in Belgrade in 1950, Vesna was 22 years old and had only been working as a flight attendant for JAT Yugoslav Airlines for about a year. She was ambitious, adventurous, and loved her job. Being a stewardess in the early 70s wasn't just a job, it was glamorous. Think Mad Men but in the sky. Now here's where fate starts playing its twisted games. Vesna wasn't even supposed to be on Flight 367. Another stewardess with the same first name, Vesna, was originally scheduled for that route, but there was a mix-up with the paperwork. Our Vesna was called at the last minute to replace her. She almost said no. She was exhausted from her previous flight, but she needed the hours. So on the morning of January 26, 1972, Vesna Vulović boarded JAT Flight 367, a Douglas DC-9 aircraft, for what should have been a routine flight from Stockholm to Belgrade with a stop in Copenhagen. She had no idea she was boarding a plane that would never land. The flight from Copenhagen took off without incident. 28 people on board, passengers and crew going about their business. Vesna was in the back of the aircraft, doing what she did best, making sure everyone was comfortable. The DC-9 cruised at 33,000 feet, that's about 10,000 meters, or roughly 6 miles up. At that altitude, outside the window, it's negative 50 degrees Celsius. The air is so thin you'd lose consciousness in seconds without pressurization. Inside, warm, safe, normal. Until 4:01 PM. Witnesses on the ground in Czechoslovakia described seeing a massive explosion in the sky. The entire fuselage of the DC-9 ripped apart. Not a crash, not a malfunction, an explosion. Mid-air, complete and catastrophic. The plane essentially disintegrated. 27 people died instantly, either from the blast itself, the sudden decompression, or the fall. Their bodies were found scattered across the snowy hills of the Srbska Kameneci mountains in Czechoslovakia. But Vesna? She was still trapped to a piece of the fuselage, still in her crew's seat, and she was falling. 33,000 feet to go. Let me put this in perspective. If you dropped a penny from this height, it would take roughly 3 minutes to hit the ground. Vesna wasn't a penny. He was a human being attached to wreckage from an exploded aircraft, tumbling through the sky at terminal velocity, about 120 miles per hour. She should have died, period. In fact, the odds of surviving a fall from this height are basically zero. There's no basically about it, it's zero. People don't survive falls like this. But somehow, impossibly, several factors aligned to save her life. First, and this is crucial, Vesna was in the tail section of the aircraft. When the plane exploded, this section remained somewhat intact. She was still strapped into a jump seat, which meant she wasn't free falling through the air like a ragdoll. Second, the tail section, being relatively heavy and aerodynamic, may have slowed the descent somewhat, not much, but enough. Third, she fell into a heavily forested area, dense pine trees on a steep mountain slope. And fourth, there was snow, deep, thick snow that had been accumulating all winter. The wreckage hit the trees first, branches snapped, absorbed some of the energy. The tail section tumbled, rolled, breaking apart further as it crashed through the forest canopy. Each impact, each collision with a tree trunk or branch, let off more velocity. Finally, it slammed into a steep, snow-covered ravine. Vesna Vulović has just survived a fall that should have killed her 10 times over. But she wasn't out of the woods yet, literally. But here's where the story takes another miraculous turn. A man named Bruno Honke, a Czech medic and World War II veteran, happened to be in the area. He heard the explosion, saw the smoke, and instead of staying away, he went towards it. When he reached the crash site, he found carnage, bodies, debris, destruction. He assumed everyone was dead, but then he heard something. Screaming. Vesna was trapped in the wreckage, pinned by her legs, unconscious but alive. And here's the critical part. Bruno Honke knew exactly what to do. As a trained medic, he knew not to move her. He kept her warm, kept her stable, and he stayed with her until rescue teams arrived. Doctors later said that if anyone else had found her, anyone without medical training, they would have likely moved her, and that movement would have killed her. Her injuries were that severe. When she reached the hospital, doctors couldn't believe she was alive. She had a fractured skull, 2 broken legs, 3 broken vertebrae in her spine, multiple broken ribs, a fractured pelvis. She was in a coma for 27 days. When she finally woke up, she had no memory of the crash, no memory of the fall. The last thing she remembered was greeting passengers in Copenhagen. Her brain had essentially deleted the trauma. The story made international headlines. Stewardess survived 6-mile fall. Vesna became an instant celebrity. She was awarded a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. But while Vesna was recovering, investigators were asking a very different question. What caused the explosion? The official investigation by Czechoslovak authorities concluded that a briefcase bomb had been placed in the forward cargo hold. The explosion was determined to be an act of terrorism, but here's where things get murky. This was 1972, height of the Cold War. Czechoslovakia was under Soviet control. Yugoslavia, while communist, was independent and had decent relations with the West. Some investigators believed the bomb story was too convenient. They suspected the plane might have been shot down, possibly by mistake, by Czechoslovak air defense. There were reports of the plane being at the wrong altitude, in restricted airspace. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a second explosion, possibly from a missile, but no conclusive evidence was ever presented. The case was closed. Bomb. Terrorism. End of story. Vesna herself believed it was a bomb, but she also acknowledged she would never know for certain. Vesna spent 16 months in hospital. She learned to walk again. The damage to her spine left her with permanent issues. She walked with a limp and needed a cane for the rest of her life. She never flew again, and honestly, can you blame her? But here's what's remarkable. She didn't let the fall define her in the way you'd expect. She went back to work for JAT Airlines, but in a desk job. She became a vocal anti-war activist during the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. She spoke out against nationalism, against violence, against the madness that consumed her country. She was repeatedly asked about the fall, about the miracle, and she had a refreshingly blunt take on it. She said she wasn't religious. She didn't think God saved her. She thought it was pure chance, an incredibly unlikely series of events that happened to align at the exact right moment. I was lucky, she would say, that's all. But she also acknowledged the weight of survivors' guilt. 27 people died. Why did she survive? There was no good answer. She stayed in touch with Bruno Honke, the man who saved her life, until his death in 2016. She called him her guardian angel. So let's talk about the science, because people always want to know, how is this even possible? Terminal velocity for a human in freefall is about 120 miles per hour. That's the speed Vesna would have been traveling when she hit the ground. At that speed, your body has roughly the same kinetic energy as a car hitting a wall at highway speed. Fatal, always fatal. Unless you hit trees that slow you down, you're in a heavy piece of fuselage that tumbles and spreads the impact over time rather than one instant collision. You land on a steep slope covered in deep snow, which further cushions the blow, and even then, you need to be incredibly, impossibly lucky. There have been other people who survived falls from aircraft, a handful, usually from lower altitudes, usually through similar circumstances, trees, snow, water, but Vesna's fall remains the highest ever survived by a massive margin. The Guinness World Record still stands, and likely will forever.
It's just one of the most incredible survival stories, if in fact not the most impressive, that we have here at Guinness World Records.
Vesna Vulović passed away in December 2016 at the age of 66. She died peacefully in her sleep in Belgrade. She lived for 44 years after a fall that should have killed her instantly. She walked, talked, loved, fought for peace, and lived a full life. Her story isn't just about survival, it's about the random, chaotic, beautiful improbability of existence. 27 people died that day. She lived. There's no reason, there's no grand plan, just chance. She fell from the edge of space and lived to tell the tale. And honestly, that might be the most human story ever told. If this story amazed you, hit that subscribe button. I've got dozens more incredible true stories like this one. And let me know in the comments, would you have gotten back on a plane? Thanks for watching.